For FingerLakes1.com, I'm Josh Durso, and this is Inside the FLX. This is part 3 of a 3-part series into the race for District Attorney in Seneca County. In parts 1 and 2, you heard from Christopher Folk and John Navager. Those two faced off in a primary contest in June. Both managed to stay on the ticket to face off against our guest this hour. Mark Sinkiewicz has served as acting district attorney throughout 2019 and looks to carry that experience over into 2020. And if there's a trend developing as we sit down with the candidates, it's that they all tout their experience and put that at the front of their campaigns. However, all three have very different types of experiences with the criminal justice system. Sinkiewicz, for his effort, says he will hit the ground running in 2020 if elected, and that's where we pick up that conversation. Remember, all 3 parts of this Inside the FLX special are live now, so check them out on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you listen to the show. Before that, though, our only break of the hour. I would like to also remind everyone listening to subscribe to the podcast on any of those aforementioned platforms. While you're there, you can also leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. It's easy to do if you use an iOS device and helps out a lot. Helps new listeners find the show. Another thing you can do to support our mission here at FO1 is to become a Patreon supporter. Visit www.patreon.com/FO1 to learn more. Today's episode is brought to you by Herman Brothers Furniture Store. Tired of the big box approach to furniture shopping? Stop in to Herman Brothers Store located in downtown Lyons and see how they've been doing it since 1945. Herman Brothers carries one of the largest selections of furniture, appliances, and mattresses between Rochester and Syracuse. And even better, Herman Brothers services all of the furniture and appliances they sell. It's the honesty, integrity, and reliability that they've been delivering for 74 years. Stop in, shop online, or give Herman Brothers a call to learn more about their low prices, free layaway, interest-free financing, and no credit needed financing. They even offer same-day or next-day delivery in most cases. Visit HermanBrothersLyons.com or call 315-946-4831 today. All right, welcome back to Inside the FLX. Acting District Attorney Mark Sinkiewicz is in studio with us. Mark, thanks so much for being here. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
First question, the easy one. Why are you running for District Attorney?
Not such an easy question. It was the last thing I thought I'd be doing. I remember the day Barry Porsch, who was the district attorney at the time, he and I were standing outside the courthouse. It was Christmas Eve, and Judge Bender had just come back from what I believe was a lunch with his staff, and they were walking into the courthouse, and as he entered the building, he turned around and saw us standing out in the parking lot and said, "Oh, I guess I should tell you guys that I'm retiring this year." And he went into the building, and Barry just kind of looked at me, and I looked at Barry, and that changed the course of history, because shortly after that, Barry decided to run for the seat. He was elected, and by operational law, I became the acting district attorney. I would have been perfectly happy being his first assistant, but I've done the job long enough to know what it takes to do the job. And given the choices, I thought I could offer the citizens of Seneca County something a little bit better.
To that end, what has this year been like as acting district attorney?
It's been a whirlwind. It's absorbing a lot of information very quickly. The district attorney's office is kind of a complex organization because you have sort of the day-to-day business things like any business would have, budgets, staffing, things like that. Then you have the legal aspect where you have to appear in court and represent the people. And then mixed in with that, there's this additional responsibility to maintain connections with the various organizations that have an influence on the law and things of that nature. So you're thrown into this position where you've got to do all those things sometimes almost at the same time. And in January is when we have, I believe we have three grants right now. All of those become up for renewal, so I had to go through the renewal process on the 3 grants we were receiving. I had to hire a few people because Barry took a couple with him, so I had to replace those individuals. So I was busy hiring and filling staff and then still getting the work done. The bigger difficulty, though, is that The district attorney always has a first assistant, sometimes called a chief deputy. They have different titles. Essentially, it's the second in command. And that person sort of acts as a filter for the district attorney and kind of takes on a lot of some of those responsibilities. And that position is currently empty. I figured that given that it was a year of transition, that it would be unfair to try to bring somebody on without a solid future to offer. So that position is currently empty. So I'm actually doing the first assistant job as well as the acting district attorney job, which makes it a little crazy.
But to that end, I mean, it sounds like that would be a level of experience that neither of the other candidates could bring to the table. Is that one of the areas where you sort of see yourself as being differential to your opponents?
Absolutely. That I believe is the difference. I tell people as I go around that this election really is not about that capital D or capital R or capital I after a name. It's about who can do the job, and you really have to look at the qualifications. I'm the only guy that actually has district attorney experience. I did it since January, but the role of first assistant is kind of unique. It's sort of like, I joke that it's kind of like the runner-up in the Miss America pageant. You know how they say, if for any reason Miss America can't fulfill her duties, then you step up. It's the same way with the first assistant. And there was a period where Barry had a health issue and he was gone from the office for a significant period of time. I stepped into his shoes and I was acting district attorney during that time as well. So I did it before and I did it since January. So that's kind of a little bit different there.
And when you look at your experience as a whole, for how many years were you or did you serve as first assistant?
So I was first assistant for 9 years.
Okay.
Barry appointed me to that role on day one of his first term when he got elected.
Are there specific cases or certain pieces of the experience over that 9-year period that you look back at and sort of see as yeah, I'm ready for this, and this is the right challenge for me to take on now, running for district attorney?
Oh, so many. The first assistant and the district attorney work very closely together, and whenever a major case comes through the office, you're actively involved in that whole process. We review the evidence together. We decide a course of action together. Oftentimes, we'll both appear in court together, just for that very reason that if something were to happen to one or the other, the case could still progress and be resolved. So you work lockstep with the district attorney at all times. When there are major issues in the office, he brings you in, makes you aware of them, looks for your guidance and your counsel. So during the 9 years that I worked with Barry, we had a very close relationship with respect to office management and case analysis and progression.
When you look at the future, and if you're elected, obviously in November, you will have to hit the ground running in January. What do the first 90 to 120 days look like from your perspective, and what your approach would be entering 2020?
One of the really alarming aspects of 2020 is that the New York State Legislature enacted 2 laws that are going to change the face of criminal procedure law here in New York State. And those have been looming for a few months now. We've gotten bare bones details about what these laws will entail. There are still lots of questions about some of those details that haven't been answered, and we're still trying to negotiate that. Since the announcement of the new laws, I've met several times in Albany with my associates trying to ascertain how we're going to handle this thing. I've met with the DAs who are in our judicial district to try to navigate this new law, but it's really going to change the face of things, and that's going to be the biggest challenge for probably the first quarter, if not the first full year of 2020, because frankly, there's a lot of aspects to this law that we're convinced won't be resolved until somebody takes an appeal and asks an appellate court to decide what this means. There are terms and issues within the law that nobody really knows what does that mean. So it'll take an appeal to do that. So that's actually been the focus since probably June of this year going into December, and then that'll be the focus of, for the most part, early next year is implementing these new laws.
And when you look at those new laws and how they could affect the way the DA's office has to operate, what is more concerning? I'm curious whether it's the administrative side and sort of the excess paperwork or the extra paperwork that will likely come along with a lot of the changes, or the actual, I guess, criminal proceeding portion of it. Obviously, the two are connected, but it seems, depending on who you talk to, there is a little bit more focus on each side from different perspectives.
I suppose my main focus would be the criminal procedure side, because that there are rules written into this law that if you don't comply with certain aspects of them, a defense attorney can make a motion to dismiss, which would be granted. So that's fatal to the case. So that aspect kind of overarches everything that we do. How do we prevent that from happening? How can we comply with the law to make sure that we're in compliance with the law, but we're also successfully prosecuting the cases? And that's kind of the big challenge. So we've actually been doing 3 or 4 things that if I would have done one of these in a year, I would have hung my hat and said, this is a major accomplishment. Yeah. One of those things that we're doing is we're becoming a digitized office. We're getting rid of the paper files. And the reason for that is one of the changes in the law is discovery and when we have to provide it and how we have to provide it to defense attorneys. So we're trying to digitize all that discovery so we could do it with a click of a button instead of having to stand over a copier and copying hundreds of pages of stuff. So that's one thing. We're also in the throes of revising our website so that we can put some of our routine discovery on a website and direct defense attorneys there. You know, if you want a data master inspection list or something, you can go to the website and download it there rather than having to produce a paper copy of that. So that's the second thing. Then the third thing is trying to integrate all of our town courts to make sure that they have wireless connections, because if we do go digital, we have to at least be able to access the file when we take our little laptop into the courtroom and be able to connect. So those are 3 things that are going on simultaneously that, like I said, any one of those I would have been happy to say, oh, we did this year.
When you look at 2020, what are your thoughts? Will there be more cases dismissed because of the changes, just by sheer volume and the course of the changes that are taking place?
So I don't believe that there will be more cases dismissed, but I believe we're going to be seeing a lot more trials. There will be less incentive on the part of defense attorneys to plea a case. Right now, the whole justification for the plea bargaining process is that we say this all the time. A defendant knows best whether or not he committed the crime, so he's in a position to know whether he's guilty or not. At the same time, if you present the matter to a defense attorney, you give them kind of a roadmap of where you're going with the case and what your evidence is. He takes that back to the defendant and says, okay, this is what they're offering, this is where the case is going, it's up to you to decide this. With the new discovery laws, that process is kind of overturned. And so the defense attorney has provided all of the evidence at the outset rather than prior to trial. And so at that point, they'll be able to decide whether or not they want to go to trial. But at that point, for our purposes, there's less incentive to plea a case because the process has already been engaged. We've already provided full discovery. We might as well take the matter to trial. That's just one step away. So we're thinking it'll probably end up in more trials. The dismissals, you're going to see some of those on very routine matters, perhaps speeding tickets, unlawful possessions of marijuana, because the discovery rules are still going to apply to those. So a police officer who writes a speeding ticket is still going to have to comply with the discovery and turn over all the documentation. There are thousands of speeding cases here at any given moment, and it's going to be difficult to track those and provide all that discovery within the amount of time. However, some of those dismissals will be without prejudice. We could always refile them, which would start the clock again. So I don't think the dismissal aspect is as big a deal unless we fail to comply with the discovery rules on like a major case, like a felony.
Mm-hmm. When you talk to different folks around the county as you're campaigning, what are the concerns, I guess, that taxpayers or that voters are bringing to you that they'd like to see the district attorney or the person running the person who wins try to tackle?
It's interesting. this has kind of been a new process for me. I'm not I ran for school board down at South Seneca, but that's, you go, you get a few signatures, and you're the only one on the ballot because nobody else wants the job, so you don't really have to campaign. But I've been around politics enough to watch and observe people who are campaigning for office. And when you're a legislator, you want to look for the feedback from your constituents, because you're going to be making policy changes and doing things that are going to direct their lives that you have an influence over. The district attorney is sworn to obey the law. You got to enforce the law. You have to do it equally. So it doesn't matter if you're a Democrat or a Republican, if you're rich or poor, if you're a judge or an average citizen, the law has to be enforced. So I can't really go to people and say, well, what would you like me to prosecute and what would you not like me to prosecute? Because that's just not an option. What I look for is, do people tell me that they've been treated with respect by the system? Do people tell me that they feel that the system is fair? And so far, knock on wood, that's what I've been getting from folks, that up to now what I've been doing seems to be fair, and people have told me that they're treated fairly, and that's a good goal.
We gave listeners a couple weeks ago the opportunity to send us questions for the candidates running for DA in Seneca County. And one of the ones that popped up quite a bit, or it's a concern more or less, the idea that some folks feel like there have been a lot of deals cut in the last 8 years or thereabouts. Whether that's perception or reality, I guess the data would bear that out. But how do you address that concern, or how do you speak to that in terms of just, looking back at your experience and thinking about all of the cases that you've handled throughout that and the DA's office has handled over that period?
The office of the district attorney wields a lot of power on a person's life, and that was part of the attraction of the job for me. It's like you make a difference in people's lives when you have this job. But with that power comes responsibility as well, to effectuate that office fairly and equally. One of the ways that I put my pillow on my head and sleep soundly at night is that I know that our office has administered justice equally across all of those demographics that I just cited to you: race, who you belong to politically, what your wealth is. It doesn't matter who you are in this county. It doesn't matter what your race is. It doesn't matter what faith you belong to. Justice will be meted out the same for you as it is for anybody. So that premise is, or that it follows then, that what has to happen is that justice has to be meted out equally among all those participants. And so if you're going to engage in a plea process where you're going to try to resolve cases so that you don't necessarily have to go to trial on every single case, which would totally cripple the justice system, if you're going to do it for one, then you need to do it for all equally. Now, that doesn't mean everybody gets the same deal, but plea bargaining, if it's going to be fair, should be offered in every single case. So if you have somebody that has a petty larceny, they went into a store and stole a pack of gum and they've never done something before, they're going to get a deal. You have somebody who commits a homicide in Seneca County, there's going to be an offer there. Now, the offers will be very different. The one with the gum might get an adjournment and contemplation and dismissal. The one who committed the homicide might get a plea to the highest charge with a slightly reduced sentence. But that way, nobody can say only certain people are getting those deals. And I think that that's vital. I think as a citizen of this county, you need to be able to rely on the equality of the justice that's being administered and not worry that friends or connected people are getting something different than others.
And when that process is sort of playing out in real time, in your experience, how does the DA's office navigate that? Are there sort of systems and policies put in place that allow you guys to be able to sort of measure it on a chart or a scale, so to speak, or is it something that you guys have to weigh case by case and thereby, really taxing your minds on top of the job that's at hand?
Every case is reviewed individually, so there are no written if-then sort of propositions. So each ADA will look at a case. And there are factors that you consider. The first thing you do is you look at the person's criminal history. You look at the nature of the case. Was this a case involving violence? Was this a property crime? Does the person have a long criminal history, or is this his first brush with the law? Then you look at the damage that's resulted from the criminal action. Is this something that's able to be made whole? For example, if you have somebody who does a significant amount of damage to somebody's property, maybe they break a door in or they destroy a car in the process of something, there's a lot of damage, maybe thousands of dollars worth of damage. Well, how do I make that person whole again because they suffered this loss? And you come to a balancing act. Well, I could send this guy to prison where he'll earn a nickel a day and probably pay off this thousands of dollars in 30 years if we're lucky. Or, because he's employed, I could place him on probation, and as a condition of probation, have him pay the restitution. And so that factors in. And then you also reach out to victims, you reach out to law enforcement. A lot of times you want to find out how was this person during the course of the processing? Was he was he regretful, or did he have an attitude? Was he combative? Is he a frequent flyer? Does the officer know him well and this person constantly does the same thing? And all of that factors into what ultimately will be an offer. Now, there's one thing that in Seneca County that's an unusual anomaly. Across the state, typically prosecutors can meet with defense attorneys and they can hammer out all of the details of a plea. So a defense attorney would call a prosecutor, they meet about a case, and they decide, okay, this is the crime I want your guy to plead to, and this is the exact sentence I'm going to offer. And then the defense attorney goes back to his guy and he says, yeah, my guy's willing to accept that. You go in front of a judge, and with few exceptions, the judge is like, fine, that's what we'll do. In Seneca County, historically, what has happened is the position of the court has been that the people can decide the charge that's going to be pled to, but only the court can decide on the sentence. And so that's been a little bit of a difficulty because the only bargaining power that we have in our office is deciding on what charge then to impose on the person, because we don't have control over the sentence. The court may ask us our opinion, but ultimately the court can reject that. They can impose more time, less time, and historically that's what's been done. So now I don't know, we're kind of looking forward to 2020 when the new judge actually takes the bench in criminal court, and we'll see what happens. We're optimistic that maybe that the norm that happens elsewhere in the state will happen here in Seneca County as well and give us a little bit more discretion.
What kind of challenges, because this is one of those questions that always comes up. Obviously, we have a couple counties in the area that have cities and larger population centers. Seneca County doesn't have that. Seneca County is one of the more rural counties in the region. So walk us through what the implications are for the district attorney's office and sort of what your approach would be to dealing with that issue if elected in November.
So population density is sort of a fluctuating thing. It can be caused by a number of things. A big city certainly will create a population density. However, you can get temporary influxes of people that will increase the population density, which will give you some of the same characteristics of a bigger populated area. And in Seneca County, we're blessed with a lot of those, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it. We have 2 prisons that have increased our population density. We have an outlet mall. The Thruway now comes through here, and we have a casino. Walmart wasn't around forever. That's a fairly recent construct. So all of those things that bring people into the county increase our population density to the point where we have very similar crimes that you see anywhere, whether it be Binghamton or Syracuse or Rochester. And in fact, with respect specifically to the drug trade, a lot of the criminals that we prosecute here come to us from Monroe County or from Syracuse. So in that sense, those aspects of our community dictate the types of cases that we see.
And when you look at obviously when people think law enforcement, when they think about cases in general that the prosecutor's office would be handling, the opioid epidemic comes to mind. What have you seen there, and what would be the outlook looking into 2020 and beyond?
You know, it's a topic that's receiving a lot of attention across the state, across the country. It's heartbreaking sometimes because we'll be standing in court with a defendant who's a member of a very respected family. We've had cases where the person standing there has a master's degree in engineering and had a very lucrative job, had some sort of a physical ailment that was prescribed painkillers, got on those, and then the next thing you know, the painkillers are no longer prescribed, and so heroin becomes the drug of choice, and now they're hooked on heroin, and there they stand. We do have a drug court that is very active. We're trying to make use of that in every case that it's appropriate, because we hope that we can offer something that will make a difference in the person's life to get them off those drugs. So drug court is one of those tools. Within the prison system, there's a program called KSAT, which is also a substance abuse treatment program. Even if we have no alternative but to send somebody to prison, there's programs available within the confines of the criminal justice system where they can get treatment and go through programming that way. I know the Seneca County Jail has a very dynamic staff that's on top of substance abuse issues, and they work very hard to connect inmates there with support programs, try to find treatment programs as an alternative to incarceration. So, I'd have to say to county residents, if you're fearful that the very first time somebody who's addicted to opioids comes before the court, they're going to be sent to prison, that does not happen in Seneca County. It's a last resort. We all recognize that this is a debilitating problem. It's a hybrid issue. It's a crime, but it's an illness that requires treatment, and everybody's aware of that. So we're doing our best within the constructs that we have now to get that treatment to the people, to turn them around. And we're ever vigilant to look for new ideas elsewhere. Each year, the prosecutors meet in Syracuse for a week long. We call it Prosecutors College, but we'll address every current topic that's going on, just to meet together and try to decide what are some strategies to handle these things. And the opioid epidemic has been a topic at that summer college probably for the last 8 to 10 years. And we continue to try to address those issues on a regular basis.
When you hear folks say, well, prosecutors need to prosecute dealers harder, they need to press for the maximum charges, they need to, is that really a tenable solution? And when you look at the approach that needs to be had, obviously when you're talking about low-level offenders who are dealing with an addiction problem themselves, it's a slightly different circumstance than someone who is dealing on a felony level. So what would be the philosophy there in terms of approaching those higher level, those tougher cases? And then also, philosophically, is always going for the max in some of those cases even a viable solution long term?
I could tell you for my part that dealers are the most heinous criminals, in my opinion, and don't deserve the considerations that I've just spoken about with respect to drug court. The problem becomes defining that term dealer, because what we find is that there's a degree or a range of dealing with respect to drugs, and there are some individuals who don't use the substance themselves at all, purely do it for monetary gain. It's their vocational goal to sell drugs, and that's what they do. They don't partake of them. They just ship them out into the community and destroy other people's lives, and those are the people that need to go to prison, no question asked. Along that spectrum are addicts whose only method of being able to fund their habit is to sell to friends. And so they'll make the connection, they'll buy a quantity of drugs, they'll give some to a friend, and then they'll keep some for their own habit. And that's the more difficult population, because we're talking about that illness/crime, and they're doing both, and you got to try to address that issue. And so you look at, okay, well, how many times has this person been caught? What sorts of chances have they been given in the past? You could give every first-time offender a chance at drug court. It's a great tool. Let them try that. But by the third time that you failed out of drug court and that becomes an option, that's no longer an option. It's not going to work. So our options become more limited based upon the number of chances a person has gotten. Straight out dealer who's sending drugs into the community needs to go away. The addict dealer will try treatment as long as it looks viable, but if it doesn't look viable, then at some point the only source of security for the community is to incarcerate them and get them out of the community, so that stops.
Anybody who wants to learn more about your campaign, where can they find that, and where can they maybe reach out to you and maybe ask you some questions in the process?
So I have a Facebook page, and it's keepmarkda, and then if they want to email me, I'm at keepmarkda@gmail.com.
Mark, thanks for the time. Appreciate it.
Thank you.